Go ahead. You can start.
I'm Steve Holman. I have the honor of serving as the president of the Antrim Historical Society. A few preliminary announcements before we go into the main bout. On June 11th, the New Hampshire Historical Society is sponsoring a program right here at the church, 3 p.m. On Sunday, June 11th, on industrialization in New Hampshire. And as many remember, this town used to be a major manufacturing hub, not just Little Company and Abbott Company, but a variety of other smaller manufacturing enterprises. On July 4th, if you want to celebrate Americana, no better place to be than in Memorial Park. We end up with the reading of the Declaration of Independence by Dean Proctor and Bill Nichols. But beforehand, we eat John Robertson's homemade donuts. We have the Antrim Ukulele Philharmonic, led by Joan Gorga, who's just coming in the back. So really, it's
I'm a tune.
never to be
No, it's
forgotten
Yankee
musical
Doodle and the Dandies.
enterprise. Also, Rick Wood in the back and Eric Kenny, who's feeling much better after an operation, we're glad to report, are sponsoring an Antrim sign project. The hope of the Historical Society is to place a commemorative sign in front of important historical sites within Antrim. If you have any ideas about what sites deserve this kind of commemoration, we would love to have your feedback. Today, we are honored to have all 4 of Dr. Alfred Chandler's daughters with us. And I'll ask you, Chandler is such an easy name to pronounce. These women have gone and acquired other last names that are significantly more difficult to pronounce. And I'll ask each of them to stand up and correct my mispronunciation. Nancy Conry, you stand up, Nancy.
My name is actually Nancy Chandler Conry.
Okay. See? Antrim women, I'm not afraid to correct. Carol Malcarney, right here. Yeah, okay, there's a pattern here. Susan Chandler-Roos. And Priscilla Chandler-Shook. And they're here to declare, to discuss their father's illustrious career. I should say that the Chandler women actually have been historical pathbreakers on their own. In the mid to late 1960s, horseback riding took off in Antrim. And the Chandler women were widely regarded as leaders in this fad. Ready and willing to teach other people how to, the skills necessary to ride horses. Dr. Chandler was so encouraging of this activity that he created a big horse corral. And legend has it that early one Sunday morning, some balloonists who were trying to blow their way up to Nathaniel Hawthorne College came down a little short right in Dr. Chandler's horse corral, and rather than calling the police and declaring these people guilty of trespassing, Dr. Chandler and Mrs. Chandler invited them in for breakfast and then sent them.
That was Becky Law Miller.
Send them all away. I think, how many of you actually had Dr. Chandler as your physician? So, I will just throw. So about half the audience. I will just throw in a personal thank you from my family. In 1952, my brother Peter contracted polio. And Dr. Chandler took care of his case, and Peter and my mother, who insisted on sleeping every night at the Peterborough Hospital despite regulations against it, they spent 10 or 14 days over there, and Peter emerged under Dr. Chandler's care with a non-paralytic form of polio, for which the Ullman family is forever grateful. So that's, so we are delighted, and I need to thank Joyce Davison, who faithfully prepares our refreshments, and also worked with Dr. Chandler in his in his office. So I'm going to turn this over to any number of Chandler dash other last name.
Well, Martin Nichols has already stolen my introduction. I was going to introduce ourselves as...
Mr. Mike.
Mike.
Oh, can everybody hear me?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, okay, I was going to introduce ourselves as the little Chandler girls, as the Nichols always used to call us. So Martin comes in the door and he goes, "It's the little Chandler girls." So thank you, Martin, for that. I'm honored. Okay, I was also going to ask, how many of you have had dad as a doctor? Because I didn't happen to look and see. Yeah. Oh, wow, that's nice. How many of you did he deliver or delivered your baby? Wow. How many of you did he give anesthesia to? Oh. Last of all, did anybody get a ride in his ambulance? We will be talking about the ambulance later. Okay, so this is the story of our dad, Dr. Alfred Chandler, in the fulfillment of the dream of a 6-year-old boy who always wanted to become a doctor. We feel, I left this picture up here as people came in because we feel this epitomized the fulfillment of that dream. I came across this picture just at a box of pictures as we were preparing this, and I said, that really says it all. And that little girl, actually, somebody took it at the hospital. That's Loretta Lemire. Does anybody know that? So, before we get started, I want to thank our sister Carol, for first of all, 30 years ago, spending many, many hours interviewing Dad and putting together his memoirs. And then just last year, she finished, again, probably took you, 4 or 5 years or so, to put together an edited collection of the over 700 letters between Dad and my mom during the war. So Carol's going to start us off with doing his early years, right up until he came to Antrim, and then I'm going to bring you from to his interviews. Carol?
First of all, we want to thank all of you for being here, and for the Historical Society members specifically for giving us this incentive to put this program together for all of you, which will be valuable for our own family and other people who wouldn't be here to see it. So, Alfred Chandler, our dad, was born on April 21st, 1909 in Cliftondale, which was a neighborhood of Saugus, Massachusetts. He was the youngest of 4 boys. His parents, their parents immigrated from England in the early part of the 1900s, with the eldest boy, Warwick, as a baby, and then the 3 others were subsequently born. Edgar, Alec, and Alfred, our 5, the youngest. The family lived on Nahant, which was then a quiet island community north of Boston. You know where it is, and there's a causeway going out to the island. And it fostered his lifelong love of the ocean.
In fact, their first house was on Little Nahant, and we actually went down there and visited, right? Just as you get on Little Nahant, there's the first road in is where their first house was. That house.
No, that's fine. You can take it back to that. They resided in 3 different houses over the years on Nahant. They were poor, but they didn't know it. That's what my dad used to say over the number of years. When Dad was just a baby, this is as the story goes, and it probably has changed over the years, but as the story goes, when Dad was a baby, his father wanted to row them to Lynn to a band concert conducted by John Philip Sousa. They were not too far offshore. A wave overturned the boat. The two older boys dog paddled to shore. His mother put him under one arm and Alec under the other, and the dad was behind them, kind of pushed them ashore. When they arrived, Dad was pretty lifeless. There was a woman walking along the beach looking for her glove that she had lost earlier in the day. She revived Dad and took the family home, got them something to eat, got them warm, and then went off. So they never, or the father never had an opportunity to properly thank her for saving his life. And without this angel, we would not be here to give this presentation. Dad was thought to have had rheumatic fever when he was little, and he missed 2 years of school after 5th grade. But he did go on to go to junior high school and then to attend Danvers High School. Around the time, it probably would have been the mid to the late 20s, his brother Edgar had gone overseas to study theology in England. He encouraged Dad to come over and work in their uncle's photography projection business in London. So Dad did subsequently go to England. And it's amazing, some of these things we found in his collection, papers and pictures. There's his official card from the projection business. There's his cycle touring license. He toured all over England and had an opportunity to take a cycling trip across France. And he loved photography, and he actually took that picture in Strasbourg. While he was in England, he realized that he still wanted to pursue his lifelong dream of becoming a physician. So he returned in 1933 on the Georgic, which was the last of the White Star lines, with his mother. It's pictured in the top on the right. She had been in England visiting her sisters. So they returned in 1933. In 1934, now living in Raymond, New Hampshire, and having decided he wanted to go into medicine, he went to Central High in Manchester to see if he could complete his high school education. They all but laughed in his face when he said he wanted to do that and continue on into medicine. But a friend suggested he go down to UNH, which he did, and he spoke with Dean Petty, and the quote is there, and he often quoted this over the years, that I believe rules are made for man. Man is not made for rules. So if the rule doesn't fit, we don't change the man, we change the rule. This was late spring of 1934. Suggested that Dad come down, go to summer school, earn some credits, and see where he stood. He said he didn't have enough money to do that, he would need to work. So he worked that summer driving a truck in Raymond with the Civilian Conservation Corps, and also chauffeured Dean Richards, the head of the English department, around. He had his license. He earned enough credits to enter his freshman year, and these are pictures all at UNH. This is his dark room. Yeah. He continued there you go. Continued his interest in photography and actually had a dark room under the clock tower at T Hall at UNH. And there's a picture of him studying. There he is with the supper club, his little study group, and his college yearbook picture. So never having graduated from high school, he was never a registered freshman, and didn't have enough credits. He worked hard at his studies that first year and several different jobs, and he made the dean's list. One of the jobs he had was photographing, doing photography for various professors. And he was able to he had the opportunity to take the pictures of Sepp and Lobo, Dean Jackson's dogs. Lobo having the ideal conformation characteristics for the Kennel Club, American Kennel Club, and it's featured in their official publication. So just a little aside. during the summer after his freshman year, he worked on the Isles of Shoals as an assistant cook for the New Hampshire summer school program. Following 2 summers, he worked on Nantucket at the Skipper restaurant. And it was during that second year that he was there, the summer after he graduated from UNH, that he learned that he had received the Commonwealth Medical School scholarship. This was the first year that it was given to a non-Massachusetts resident. And the program was set up, scholarship program was set up to alleviate shortages of doctors in rural communities of population of 5,000 or less. So this was very, very special at that time, and I think started the path toward his eventually arriving in this area. Dad was accepted at Tufts University Medical School, Tufts University School of Medicine. I want to get the title correct. Entered that fall, the fall of 1938. His first day of medical school was made more significant because that was the day of the Great Hurricane in New England, September 21st, 1938. His first day of medical school. Medical students at that time were allowed 1 year of internship before going into military on active duty. People have asked if he enlist, and this was the protocol then, so he knew he was going to go into the military and to active duty. He chose to do his year of internship at Springfield Hospital, which is where he met our mother, Janice Chandler, the fireball in the records room. And my mother, she was a fireball. Evidently, Dad thought she was. She was working.
You kind of listen to some of Lucy's stories back in the teen years.
Yes, and unfortunately, we don't have our uncle here to back that up. That she was. So they had a short courtship. Dad was commissioned then as first lieutenant in the Army, and they were married on September 25th, 1943, before he was to go overseas on active duty. But before going overseas, he had a couple of assignments out west with different battalions, Searchlight Battalion, and Mom was out there for a period of time and then came back. So the life was very complicated and back and forth. It wasn't just a straight line. So she came back and lived with her family in Holyoke, Massachusetts, on Liberty Street. It was my mom. This is actually fast forwarding. That's me as a baby. I wasn't born until later. Dad didn't see me until after I was born. But this is our mother with her family in Holyoke. And we only realized the challenges that she herself went through by the extensive collection of letters. But she was very close-mouthed about the things that were going on in her own life, which, later we discovered. And but that was her year. Her dad was overseas. So he was with the Searchlight Battalion in San Diego first before he went to Europe in December of 1944. And what they were later to realize was the Queen Elizabeth, which had been outfitted with 18 complete hospital units, some general and some evacuation. Going on to Dad's experience overseas, he was in England for a couple of months and then spent the rest of the time in France and Germany. Probably his most interesting and challenging experiences there was when his battalion took over Stalag 6A, one of the prisoner of war camps in Hamar, Germany. Conditions were horrific as they were capturing the officers, releasing the prisoners, but not as horrific as nearby Buchenwald, which he did have an occasion to visit. So, in Dad's own words from an earlier interview, he said, "We were brought up right behind the front, behind the guns. We could hear the guns. They're about as far from here as Bennington. We received battle casualties all night long under cover of darkness. We would ship the wounded out the next morning and start all over again that night. We had to be prepared to pull back quickly or go forward on a minute's notice. So he told that to somebody in an interview. That's not something that he actually told us. There were very few really war stories that he shared, but you can only imagine what his experiences were and what he saw during his time overseas. VJ Day was declared August 14th, 1945, and this copy of the Stars and Stripes military publication was actually in one of the letters that he sent home to Mom. And I have it at that table if you want to see it. He wasn't able to return right away. Many of the soldiers and military did return, but he returned month of March, arrives home on March 26, 1946, on the George Washington as a ship's doctor, reuniting with our mom and her family and meeting me for the first time, born the previous July. Dad was honorably discharged. He was promoted to the rank of Major of the Army of the United States Reserve. He was honorably discharged. He took a refresher course at the Springfield Hospital and one at Tufts as well. And it was the summer of 1946, at the age of 37, that he started to consider where he wanted to set up his practice. So he came to the Peterborough area and ultimately settled in this lovely community of Antrim. Yay. Priscilla will take it over and we'll hear what you really came to hear. It's really a doctor.
As we come to this part of my parents' life in Antrim, we want to point out that we didn't want this to be all about Dad, but more about the people and the community in which he lived. So we have some stories and some pictures of some of the people and events in Antrim. So we hope that you longtime residents will enjoy the memories and that you new-time people will at least appreciate the history and the important role that the people of the community played in the enrichment of Antrim's own dock. And we are hoping that at the end that you will all bring up some stories and things too that we may not have heard. So as part of the Commonwealth Medical School Scholarship, he was given $500 to set up a practice in a rural area. So he and his dad drove around New Hampshire and eventually settled on, well, actually chose that beautiful town of Antrim. This picture shows it's a postcard that looks like it probably looked around the time that they may have moved here. This car here looks more like a 1930s car, but sometimes around there. Right here is the office. This is the house now that Rick and Diane live in. So January 3rd, 1947, Mom and Dad and my oldest sister, Carol, moved in for Dad to start his practice. His very first patient arrived at the same time as the moving van did. She had fallen and sprained her wrist. Obviously it was on the ice. So she stopped and asked Dad to look at it, which of course he did. When she offered to pay, he said, just skip it. So a couple days later, she showed up with a freshly baked blueberry pie, which was his first payment for service in his life. Everybody else hangs up their dollars on the wall. we ate the blueberry pie. His second patient, as he told Lyman Gilmore in an interview many years later, arrived with a face full of porcupine quills. So I said, I took him out to the barn. Yes, the barn, he says. I put him to sleep, and when he came to, he ran home wagging his tail. Now, does anybody know who this is? Marty? Do you know who that is? You'll find out. We have to backtrack now from 1947 back to probably around 1934. Dad was a pre-med school student down at UNH, and he was hitchhiking home to Raymond, New Hampshire, where he was living with his brother at the time. And a woman stopped and picked him up. And of course, he told her in the conversation that he was studying to become a doctor. And she said, wouldn't it be funny if at some point I walked into your office one day? And sure enough, that many years later, Pauline Whitney, you know Pauline, walked in and reminded him of that day that she had picked him up. Now this car, I know was not Pauline's car. Martin, you're going to say she never drove that car. And I know that, but I was looking on the internet to look for cars of about that period of time, and there were all sorts of ones to choose from. And I looked at that car and I said, I can picture Pauline in that car. Now, my mother, being a city girl, didn't know what she was getting into by moving to rural New Hampshire, and she didn't know what she was going to have to bring with her. So she brought with her a year's worth of toilet paper. So she was very pleased to find that when she got here, she could get toilet paper and many other things that she might want at Annie and Emily Fleury's store on Main Street. Now, we don't have any young pictures of Annie or Em, but this was Annie about 40 years later with my son Jeff, as she lived across the street from us. So this is the house on Main Street as it looked like back in the early 50s. It doesn't look like that now. I think you all know it's an apartment house. You wouldn't even recognize it. But the office shared our family home. The office was here in the front. Here was Dad's examining room, the waiting room, and here was Dr. Wiederholz when he came, his consultation room. Both examining rooms opened up directly onto the kitchen. So we have these pictures of these very cute little girls here to kind of show you the proximity. There I was ironing in the kitchen, but that door right here actually opened up into Dr. Wiederholz's examining room. This door opened up into the bathroom that the patients had to use. So they would walk through our kitchen into the bathroom and leave their specimens on the back of the toilet. So this picture shows actually that the door to my dad's examining room actually opened to the kitchen. And you can actually see his diplomas on the wall. Now, there was one evening, the story that Dad had, one evening, as most of the patients were coming into the office from the front door, one woman walked in through the back door, which would have brought us in through this door, and with a sick baby. So Dad, just picked the baby up, took him into his examining room, treated him, handed him back to his mother, and just sat down and finished his dinner. It wasn't until I got older that I realized how bizarre this was. So after 6 years of full-time practice with little to no time off, he advertised for a partner. And Dr. Louis Wiederholz answered that call, and it was either 1952 or 1953 that that Dr. Wiederholz and his wife Betsy and their firstborn daughter moved in and settled in Francistown. I was hoping Betsy and Nancy were going to be here, but I guess they're not. But one thing. They practiced together for many years, both in the office, and they both shared the responsibility of delivering anesthesia. So over the next several years, the Chandlers added 3 more daughters, and the Wiedeholds added 3 more daughters. So, as did the next anesthesiologist that took over for Dad after he moved. So we have 3 anesthesiologists in a row that had 4 daughters. We wondered if it was something about the gases or something. So of course, they couldn't have done their work without their wonderful staff of nurses. This, I think, was his first nurse, Tony Edwards. And here's Tony with her husband, Arn, who was actually Dad's accountant. These are the 2 nurses that were with him the longest, I think. This was Shirley Hogan and Doris Platt. Now, we don't have it, but we tried to get a picture of Joyce Brooks Davison, but she was too shy. So I want Joyce to stand up now and take credit for it. And also Bobby Merchant, who we totally lost track of. But they were like probably the 5 main people that were with him. Now, sorry, I do have to refer. Both Dad and Dr. Wiedehold were very active in many. Oh, thank you. I was just. Both Dad and Dr. Wiedehold were active in various local, state organizations. This was the meeting in which the New Hampshire chapter of the American Academy of General Practice was formed. I don't know what year it was, but this is held up in Conway, North Conway, New Hampshire. So both, like here's Dr. Wiedehold, and here was Dad. Some of the other positions that Dad held were, he was the medical referee for Hillsborough County for 4.5 years. He served as a member of the House of Delegates of the New Hampshire Medical Society. He also served as the president of Monadnock Hospital. Of course, this was before the days of cell phones. So so that they realized that they were both on the road so much that they needed to have some kind of communication, because between them doing, house calls, road calls, out to accidents and so forth, they needed some kind of a communication. So they had installed 2-way radios, probably a 5-way radio communication system. So the office had one, both houses had one, and then both cars had one. Now the 1940s, yeah, everybody knows Jane. The 1940s and 50s were the time of the Craig telephones and the local telephone operators. And it was actually the telephone operators that served as his answering service. So Dad would, anytime he was going away, he would just call up Jane and tell him where he's going to be. So she would either take a message or forward the call to wherever he would be. And also Jane had this uncanny ability to keep track of the whole town wherever they were going.